Modern soccer or football originated in Britain in the 19th century. Games were played in towns and villages according to local customs and with minimum rules. For a long time, there was no clear distinction between football and rugby. There were also many variations concerning the size of the ball, the number of players, and the length of the match. Football was taken up as a winter game between residents' houses at public schools, such as Winchester, Rugby, and Eton. Each school had its own rules. Some allowed limited handling of the ball, and others did not. At Rugby, the rules included the possibility to take up the ball with the hands, and the game we today know as rugby has its origins from here. At Eton, on the other hand, the ball was played exclusively with the feet, and this game can be seen as a close predecessor to the modern football. The game in rugby was called the running game, while the game in Eton was called the dribbling game. The difference in rules made it hard for public schoolboys entering university to continue playing except with former classmates. As early as 1843, an attempt to standardize and codify the rules of play was made at the University of Cambridge. Students of the most public schools in 1848 adopted these Cambridge rules, which were further spread by Cambridge graduates who formed football clubs. In 1863, a series of meetings involving clubs from London and surrounding counties produced the printed rules of football, which prohibited the carrying of the ball. Thus, the handling game of rugby remained outside of the newly formed Football Association. Indeed, by 1870, all handling of the ball except by the goalkeeper was prohibited by the FA. It is very interesting that the game is known by two different names in the world: soccer and football. Both terms actually became popular in England. After Football Association was established and rules were agreed on, the game played under these rules was called Association Football, which got shortened to football or SOC, which in turn got shortened even more to soccer. So both terms are correct and in fact have the same origin. The new rules were not universally accepted in Britain, however. Many clubs retained their own rules, especially in and around Sheffield. Although this northern English city was the home of the first provincial club to join the FA in 1867, it also gave birth to the Sheffield Football Association, the forerunner of later county associations. Sheffield and London clubs played 2 matches against each other in 1866, and a year later, a match pitting a club from Middlesex against one from Kent and Surrey was played under the revised rules. In 1871, 15 FA clubs accepted an invitation to enter a cup competition and to contribute to the purchase of the trophy. By 1877, the associations of Great Britain had agreed upon a uniform code. 43 clubs were in competition, and the London club's initial dominance had diminished. The development of modern football was closely tied to the processes of industrialization and urbanization in Britain. Most of the new working class people gradually lost their interest in their old pastimes, such as badger baiting, and sought new forms of collective leisure. From the 1850s onward, industrial workers were increasingly likely to have Saturday afternoons off work, and so many turned to the new game of football to watch or to play. Key institutions such as churches, trade unions, and schools organized working-class boys and men into recreational football teams. Rising adult literacy increased press coverage of organized sports, while transport systems such as railways or trams enabled players and spectators to travel to football games. Average attendance in England rose from 4,500 in 1888 to 8,000 in 1895, rising even more to 13,000 in 1905 and reaching 23,000 at the outbreak of World War I. Football's popularity eroded public interest in other sports, most notably cricket. Football clubs have existed since the 19th century, but unorganized and without official status. It is therefore hard to decide which was the first football club. Some historians suggest that it was the football club formed in 1824 in Edinburgh. Early clubs were often formed by former school students, and the first of this kind was formed in Sheffield in 1855. The oldest among professional football clubs is the English club Notts County, that was formed in 1862 and still exists today. Leading clubs, notably those in Lancashire, started charging admission to spectators as early as 1870s, and so despite the FA's amateurism rule, they were in position to pay illicit wages to attract highly skilled working-class players, many of them hailing from Scotland. Working-class players and Northern English clubs sought a professional system that would provide in part some financial reward to cover their broken time, that's the time lost from their other work, and the risk of injury. The FA decided to sustain a policy of amateurism that protected upper and upper middle class influence over the game. This issue of professionalism reached a crisis in England in 1884, when the FA expelled 2 clubs for using professional players. However, the payment of players had become so commonplace by then that the FA had little option but to sanction the practice a year later, despite initial attempts to restrict professionalism out of reimbursement for broken time. The consequence was that northern clubs, with their larger supporter bases and capacity to attract better players, came to prominence. Professionalism also sparked further modernization of the game through the establishment of the Football League, which allowed the leading dozen teams from the North and Midlands to compete systematically against each other from 1888 onwards. A lower, second division was introduced in 1893, and the total number of teams increased to 28. The Irish and Scots formed leagues in 1890, the Southern League began in 1894, but then absorbed by the Football League in 1920. Yet football did not become a major profit-making business during this period. Professional clubs became limited liability companies, primarily to secure land for gradual development of stadium facilities. Most clubs in England were owned and controlled by businessmen, but shareholders received very low, if any, dividends. Their main reward was an enhanced public status through running the local club. Later, national leagues overseas followed the British model, which included league championships, at least one annual club competition, and a hierarchy of leagues that sent clubs finishing highest in the table up to the next higher division, and clubs at the bottom down to the next lower division. A league was formed in the Netherlands in 1889, but professionalism arrived only in 1954. Germany completed its first national championship season in 1903, but the Bundesliga, a comprehensive and fully professional national league, did not evolve until 60 years later. In France, where the game was introduced in the 1870s, a professional league did not begin until 1932. Shortly after, professionalism had been adopted in the South American countries of Argentina and Brazil.